it's gonna change anyway. The wave thing came in, you know, I was a wave. And then the next thing you know, it's like, it's always something else. You're gonna be like fat slob soon, I don't know.
Hi, AD. I'm Amber Valletta. Come on in.
She was the face that defined 90s elegance, but Hollywood revealed a side no runway ever could. Amber Valletta's story isn't just about the dazzling glory of a supermodel under the lights. It's also about dark corners, difficult choices, and reinventions. How does a girl from an ordinary American neighborhood become both a fashion icon and a Hollywood presence? The answer is far more complex than it seems. And the most thrilling part? We're just getting started. If you want to know how this journey began, don't skip a second of this story. Amber Valletta was born on February 9th, 1974 in Phoenix, Arizona. She came from a working-class family. Her mother was a hard-working, devoted woman, while her father left the family when Amber was young. Her childhood unfolded in the quiet suburban life of the American Southwest. Money was tight, but her mother's determination and love became her strongest foundation. From an early age, Amber was shy, introverted, and a bit of a dreamer. People around her quickly noticed her quiet, observant nature. At school, she always felt different from her peers. Her tall frame and striking features made her stand out even during adolescence. But it wasn't something she took pride in. At that age, standing out often meant being a target. Sometimes she was teased for her silence, other times for her slim build. Despite the cruel words and dismissive stares, Amber didn't retreat into bitterness. Instead, she sought comfort in her imagination. She loved drawing, flipping through fashion magazines, and inventing outfits in her head. By the time she turned 13, her mother was the first to see the potential in her posture and face. Friends echoed the same thoughts, and eventually her mother signed her up for a modeling class. At first, she resisted. The thought of a runway or a camera felt foreign. But with her mother's encouragement, she gave it a chance. That decision would open a door that changed her life forever. From the very beginning, her instructors noticed something special. Amber's striking bone structure embodied the clean and sophisticated look that fashion craved at the time. One teacher later said, Amber didn't seem to crave the spotlight, but the spotlight seemed to crave her. At 14, her mother took her to a modeling agency in Tulsa, Oklahoma. There, Amber received her first big opportunity, a chance to compete in an international modeling contest. Despite her youth, her grace and discipline stood out immediately. At the time, the industry was dominated by giants like Cindy Crawford, Christy Turgellington, and Linda Evangelista. Nobody could have guessed that this shy teenager would soon walk the same runways as these icons. Amber didn't win the contest, but she won something more important: the industry's attention. Scouts from New York noticed her, and even as a high school student, she was being offered opportunities her peers couldn't even imagine. But it was also a turning point. Would she live an ordinary teenage life, or take the leap into the unpredictable fashion world? Her mother's words guided her. Try whatever you want, but never forget who you are. That advice stayed with her throughout her career. Because the fashion world could be enchanting, but it could also be brutal. By the age of 15, Amber had moved to New York City. She was just a teenager adjusting to the relentless pace of a global metropolis. At first, it was overwhelming. Loneliness, homesickness, and constantly changing surroundings wore her down. But fueled by determination and her mother's support, Amber learned to survive and then thrive. Her greatest fortune was crossing paths with the right people early on. Renowned photographers recognized her versatility. On set, she could embody sophistication one day and youthful innocence the next. This adaptability quickly made her indispensable to agencies. Her breakthrough came in the early 1990s, when Vogue decided to put her on the cover at just 18 years old. That cover was a turning point. The world was introduced to a new star. From that moment, Amber wasn't just America's rising talent. She was making waves in Europe, too. Soon, she was walking the runways of Milan, Paris, and London. Versace, Gucci, and Calvin Klein all lined up to book her. Her runway presence was graceful yet powerful, described by critics as quiet grandeur. Amber Valletta was no longer just a young hopeful. She was one of the new faces of fashion. But behind the glamorous rise were struggles few could see. She was still very young, and the fast pace of her career often overshadowed her personal growth. While her peers enjoyed college life and carefree youth, she was working exhausting hours between shows and photo shoots. The lifestyle instilled discipline, but also robbed her of the simple joys of a normal adolescence. This inner conflict would later push Amber toward Hollywood. The runway's grandeur wasn't enough to fully express who she was. She wanted something deeper, a new way to tell stories. But before she reached that point, she still had many milestones to conquer in fashion. One of Amber's first major breakthroughs came in 1993 with a Calvin Klein campaign. Despite her young age, she embodied the brand's minimal yet powerful aesthetic perfectly. These shoots proved she wasn't just a pretty face. She was a model who could bring depth to the fashion narrative. At a time when the industry was more focused on flashy, eye-catching looks, Amber's understated but sophisticated style offered something new. Her rise after the Vogue cover continued with Elle, Harper's Bazaar, and W magazine. Editors loved working with her because Amber radiated authenticity in front of the camera. Photographers, too, found her effortless. She didn't need heavy direction. She simply surrendered herself to the moment, letting her body language tell the story. Her success wasn't confined to the US. Paris and Milan runways expanded her international career rapidly. Gianni Versace, after seeing her on the catwalk, called her the quiet echo of elegance. Tom Ford described her as one of the rare models who blended classic Hollywood with the modernity of the 90s. But this meteoric rise came at a cost. Having left home at 16, Amber was still searching for her identity while traveling the world. The relentless pace of fashion only intensified her longing for normal teenage milestones. While her peers prepared for prom night, Amber was strutting down haute couture runways in Paris or posing for shoots in New York until dawn. Early on, the media cast her as the innocent-faced girl, yet her impact wasn't built on looks alone. Her professionalism set her apart. She was punctual, respectful, and consistent, which earned her a reputation as one of the most reliable models in the industry. During this period, one of her closest collaborators was legendary photographer Stephen Meisel. His shoots with Amber defined pivotal moments in her career. In front of his lens, Amber didn't just pose. She became someone else entirely. This hinted at something deeper. She wasn't just a model. She was, at her core, an actress. By the mid-90s, Amber had firmly earned the title of supermodel. She walked alongside Naomi Campbell, Claudia Schiffer, and Kate Moss. The industry spoke of the Big Six, the elite group of supermodels, and Amber was welcomed into their ranks as one of the most in-demand faces of her time. Behind the glamour, though, Amber faced battles no one could see. Living independently at such a young age, grappling with loneliness, and being constantly scrutinized took its toll. The same industry that celebrated her beauty also magnified her smallest flaws. At times, Amber admitted she felt crushed by the weight of these expectations. In interviews, she often said, "This job made me grow up, but it also took so much from me." Her accomplishments in fashion were just the beginning of a much larger journey, because Amber Valletta was searching for something beyond the runway lights. By the mid-1990s, Amber Valletta was no longer just a fresh face in fashion. She was being called a rising icon. Landing the cover of Vogue at just 18 had been a beginning, but the real momentum came afterward. The biggest magazines in the fashion world were chasing her. Every month, a new cover seemed to bear Amber's face. Vogue Paris, Vogue Italia, Harper's Bazaar, and Elle all framed her as the emblem of 90s elegance. Amber's runway walk was different. She didn't rely on dramatic poses to command attention. Instead, the confidence in her steps, the calm in her face, and her natural elegance captivated audiences. Watching her felt less like observing a model and more like witnessing the entrance of a graceful character onto a stage. Designers adored her for this. Calvin Klein, Prada, Gucci, Valentino, Versace. Every powerhouse of the era wanted Amber to embody the spirit of their collections. Especially during Tom Ford's tenure at Gucci, Amber's prominence in the show solidified her supermodel status. Amber became a phenomenon not only on the runway, but also in ad campaigns. In 1995, she appeared alongside Claudia Schiffer and Nadja Auermann in a Versace campaign. When the photos were released, the press called them fashion's golden trio. At that point, Amber wasn't just another model. She had become one of the defining symbols of the decade. But success came with an intense wave of media attention. Interviews constantly referred to her with the supermodel label. Amber, however, found the term exaggerated. She preferred to see herself as a dedicated professional. In one interview, she said, "I step on stage and do my job. What people choose to call me is up to them." Her relationship with Vogue held a special place in her career. The magazine's editors recognized her versatility. Amber shined as much in classic haute couture looks as she did in modern minimalist designs. For this reason, the fashion world saw her as a chameleon, a model who could transform effortlessly. In 1996, Amber appeared on the cover of American Vogue alongside Shalom Harlow. The friendship and chemistry between the two made waves in the industry. Amber and Shalom became one of the most iconic duos of the decade. Their joint shoots proved that fashion wasn't just about clothes, it was about creating an atmosphere. Yet, behind all the success, Amber's personal life was becoming increasingly complicated. Becoming an international icon at such a young age meant she was growing up without experiencing the usual milestones of youth. Watching her peers live ordinary lives sometimes made her feel trapped in another world. This phase of Amber's career was both enchanting and challenging. The fashion industry offered her endless opportunities, but at the same time, it demanded sacrifices from her personal life. One of the most striking aspects of Amber's career was the fashion industry's ability to see different stories in her face. In one campaign, she could shine like a classic Hollywood star, while in another, she embodied the power of a modern businesswoman. This versatility made her perfectly suited to the rapidly shifting aesthetics of the 1990s. By 1997, Amber was no longer just a model on the runway, she was known as the opening face. Designers chose her to set the tone for their collections, and whenever she stepped onto the catwalk, audiences were mesmerized. Her opening for Christian Dior at Paris Fashion Week that year sealed her status once again. The media often compared Amber to industry giants like Naomi Campbell and Kate Moss. But what set her apart was not only her charisma, but also the sense of serenity she conveyed. In one interview, Amber said, "I believe beauty is about making people feel at ease. If they find comfort when they look at me, then I'm doing my job right." At this stage of her career, Amber also dominated the advertising world. She appeared in campaigns for Louis Vuitton, Chanel, and Giorgio Armani. She worked with the most prestigious photographers in fashion, Peter Lindbergh, Mario Testino, and Richard Avedon. Each loved capturing a different side of her. Yet, behind the glamour, Amber's personal life was heading in a different direction. The demanding schedule, endless travel, and constant exposure to cameras sometimes deepened her sense of loneliness. Under the spotlight, she was celebrated, but backstage she remained quiet and introspective. In a 1998 interview, she remarked, "For me, the best moment is when I come back to the dressing room after a show and take off my shoes. That's when I return to myself." Unlike many supermodels of her time, Amber chose to stay away from the party scene and tabloid headlines. This created an aura of mystery around her. The fashion world saw her on the job, but her personal life remained largely private. These years solidified Amber's identity as a true supermodel. By the late 90s, she had become more than a face. She was a brand. The trust designers placed in her, the eagerness of editors to feature her, and the admiration of audiences all combined to secure Amber Valletta's place firmly on the supermodel throne. By the late 1990s, Amber Valletta had lived the height of her supermodel identity. She was the opening face of major runway shows, the indispensable cover star of Vogue, and the embodiment of elegance and serenity in fashion. But for Amber, those achievements eventually weren't enough. She didn't want to be remembered only as a model. Deep inside, she carried a desire to try something different in front of the camera: acting. As a child, Amber had been quiet and dreamy. She would watch movies on television, studying how actors transformed into characters, then recreate scenes by herself. Although it took years for her to bring this side of herself into her professional life, by the late 1990s, she was ready to step beyond the fashion world. In 1999, she landed her first significant acting opportunity. In What Lies Beneath, starring heavyweights Harrison Ford and Michelle Pfeiffer, Amber played a small role. For her, it was like a test. She discovered that the world in front of the movie camera was vastly different from the runway. On the catwalk, she only needed to captivate in seconds with her walk. In cinema, she had to communicate the emotions of a character to the audience. It was both thrilling and intimidating. Amber's transition into acting caused a stir in the fashion press. Some dismissed her, saying she was just a model, while others saw her move as a bold step that strengthened the bridge between fashion and cinema. Amber herself wasn't bothered by the chatter. What mattered to her was trying something new. In the early 2000s, her acting career slowly began to take shape. Hitch, 2005, became one of her most recognizable Hollywood projects. Sharing the screen with Will Smith boosted her visibility outside of fashion. The film was a romantic comedy, and Amber's natural elegance made her a perfect fit for the genre. Critics described her performance as surprisingly strong. Still, Amber's journey in acting wasn't without challenges. She had to fight the stigma of being labeled a model-turned-actress. When asked about it in interviews, she responded, "What matters isn't the label you use, but how seriously I approach the work I do." Amber's Hollywood journey wasn't limited to big films. She also made her presence known on television. Her role in the mid-2000s series Revenge introduced her acting skills to a wider audience. Here, she wasn't just an elegant face. She delivered a character with dramatic depth. Amber's on-screen presence proved she was far more than a model crossing over into acting. Even as she advanced in her acting career, Amber didn't completely sever ties with fashion. She continued to appear in select runway shows and campaigns. By then, however, the press referred to her not only as a supermodel, but also as an actress. While the fashion world initially viewed her Hollywood venture with caution, over time they acknowledged her ability to succeed in both arenas. Amber Valletta's filmography included projects from a wide range of genres. In action films, she portrayed elegant yet powerful women. In romantic works, her natural charm stole the spotlight. This variety reflected the flexibility she had honed through modeling. Just as she transformed into different personas on the runway with each outfit, she could embody diverse characters on screen. Still, her Hollywood path wasn't always easy. Long hours on set demanded a discipline very different from the runway. In one interview, Amber summarized the contrast. "On the catwalk, you have a burst of energy for a few minutes. In film, you may have to work for days just to get one scene right." During this period, her personal life also drew more public curiosity. The press speculated about her relationships, friendships, and private world behind the scenes. Yet Amber managed to preserve her privacy, as she always had. She rarely appeared in tabloids, choosing instead to focus on her work and family. By the late 1990s, Amber had established a hybrid career, balancing fashion and Hollywood. She hadn't lost her position in the fashion industry, and at the same time, she carved out a place for herself in film and television. At this stage, Amber Valletta wasn't just a supermodel or an actress. She had become an icon across disciplines. For Amber Valletta, fashion was never just about clothes. By the late 2000s, after adding remarkable achievements to both her modeling and acting careers, she found herself at a turning point. What made her unforgettable wasn't only her beauty, elegance, or performances on Hollywood screens. What truly set her apart was her courage to use her voice for the greater good. Especially through her environmental awareness and commitment to sustainable fashion, Amber became much more than a supermodel. She had walked countless runways, graced magazine covers, and starred in ad campaigns. But behind the curtain, she saw a reality that troubled her deeply. The massive textile waste, the toxic chemicals used in production, and the exploitative structure of fast fashion weighed heavily on her conscience. She refused to stay silent. When she finally spoke out, her words were sharp and direct. Fashion can be beautiful, but irresponsible fashion can never be acceptable. By the early 2010s, the sustainable fashion movement was gaining global momentum. At that moment, Amber Valletta emerged as one of its most powerful advocates. She was no longer just fighting for a place on the runway, she was fighting for the planet's future. For her fans, this was proof of her humanity. She demonstrated that beauty alone wasn't enough. It gained lasting meaning only when combined with conscience and responsibility. In 2013, Amber marked a milestone in her career. She launched Master and Muse, an innovative platform that brought together sustainable fashion brands. All the designers featured on the site shared a commitment to eco-friendly production methods and ethical values. With this project, Amber transformed from being merely a critic of the system to being part of the solution. In her own words, she was promoting a chic but responsible vision of style. Her initiative created ripples across the fashion industry. Some praised her authenticity and applauded her boldness. Others dismissed her efforts as nothing more than image work. Yet Amber silenced critics through consistent dedication over the years. She gave keynote speeches at conferences, appeared in documentaries, and spearheaded social media campaigns. For her, this was not a passing trend. It was a way of life. Amber Valletta didn't stop at raising awareness about fashion's impact on the environment. She also exposed injustices within the industry. She spoke against the exploitation of workers by fast fashion corporations, the unfair wages, the use of child labor, and the lack of transparency in supply chains. Coming from someone who had stood at the very heart of the fashion world for decades, her words carried undeniable weight. This stance gave her career a new dimension. The press began calling her not just a supermodel, but the supermodel with a conscience. For her fans, that title elevated her even further. They recognized her willingness to take risks and speak truth to power, even when it meant challenging some of the biggest names in the business. Amber's activism was never about individual heroism. It was about building collective awareness. Whether on runways, panels, or documentaries, her message remained the same. The fashion industry holds immense power. If we channel that power in the right direction, we can change the future of the planet. Her words inspired a new generation of designers and models to think differently. Over the years, Amber received numerous honors and awards. Yet for her, the true reward was shifting mindsets. In one interview, she said, "The greatest success for me is when a young designer tells me, 'After listening to you, I used sustainable materials in my collection.'" That simple statement captured what gave her career its deepest meaning. Amber Valletta's activism was never limited to the environment. Another field where she raised her voice was social justice and human rights. From years inside the fashion industry, she had witnessed exploitation firsthand, and now she was determined to call it out from the outside. No one should suffer in the name of beauty, she said. That sentence summed up her entire philosophy. She became an outspoken critic of fast fashion giants. Amber highlighted how many companies paid workers unlivable wages, how child labor persisted in some regions, and how supply chains lacked transparency. She posed a simple but powerful question. Everyone wants to look stylish, but who's really paying the price for that style? Her words didn't just resonate with fashion lovers, they began to influence everyday consumers as well. People started asking themselves more often, is this purchase ethical? In this sense, Amber wasn't just a spokesperson. She was a catalyst for awareness. Her work eventually drew the attention of international organizations. She was invited to United Nations events addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. In her speeches, she presented hard facts about the industry's toll on the planet. For example, she pointed out that the textile industry is the second largest water polluter in the world and that millions of tons of waste end up in the oceans every year. But Amber didn't stop at identifying problems. She also offered solutions. She promoted the idea of less but better, encouraging people to buy fewer items of higher quality. She also pushed young designers to use sustainable materials in their collections. Her goal was to transform both consumer habits and producer mindsets at the same time. One of the strongest aspects of Amber Valletta's activism was her authenticity. She was willing to risk the fame and fortune she had built over decades. Some of the brands that supported her didn't align with sustainability, yet Amber didn't hesitate to walk away from those partnerships. That decision showed she was willing to make sacrifices for the values she believed in. Her fight also inspired a new generation of models. More and more, young names in fashion wanted to be recognized not just for their beauty, but for their values. Amber became a pioneer of what could be called a quiet revolution within fashion, a shift from appearance to meaning, from profit to purpose. Amber Valletta's story is not confined to the lights of the runway or the glamour of red carpets. Her life carried a deeper, more human dimension, one that involved motherhood, personal transformation, and the legacy she wanted to leave for society. In the early 2000s, Amber entered a new chapter when she became a mother. The birth of her son, Auden, completely reshaped her outlook on life. Her schedule, once filled only with fashion shoots, runway shows, and film projects, now revolved around something far more personal and emotional. Motherhood has given me patience and compassion above all, she often said. These words reflected not just her daily reality, but a profound inner shift. For Amber, motherhood wasn't just a personal joy. It also fueled her activism. She felt a responsibility to fight for a world where her son and future generations could thrive. This belief made her voice in sustainability, environmental awareness, and ethical fashion grow even stronger. In her eyes, the fight wasn't only for her own time, but for the future of all children. Balancing motherhood and career pushed Amber to seek harmony. On stage or on screen, she embodied strength and perfection. At home, she preferred to be just Auden's mom. Cooking meals, attending school events, or going on nature walks became just as meaningful to her as appearing on the cover of Vogue. In interviews, she often said, "More than being a famous supermodel, I want to be a good mom in my son's eyes." Her Hollywood path also began to shift in those years. Instead of chasing blockbuster roles, she became more selective. She gravitated toward independent films and character-driven stories. For her, fame was no longer the goal, meaning was. She wanted to prove that authenticity mattered more than artificial glamour in both acting and fashion. Of course, life wasn't always smooth. Balancing a demanding career with the responsibilities of motherhood was never easy. But Amber never pretended to have a perfect life. She was candid about her struggles, which made her more relatable and genuine in the eyes of her fans. Amber Valletta wasn't just an icon. She was a person who stumbled, learned, and got back up again. Perhaps the most striking aspect of her journey was her personal transformation. As a young woman, she had endured the relentless pressures of the industry, the media obsessing over her body, the constant scrutiny of her measurements. For years, those pressures weighed heavily on her psyche. Yet over time, she turned that pressure into power. She refused to let her identity be defined by appearance alone. Through activism, motherhood, and self-discovery, she found her inner strength. That transformation made her not just a supermodel, but also a role model. Today, when people talk about Amber Valletta, they don't only recall her graceful walk or flawless bone structure. They remember her fight for the environment, her defense of ethical values, and the compassion motherhood instilled in her. Her legacy stretches far beyond the runway. It lies in conscious consumption, sustainable living, and the values of humanity. Amber Valletta's later career reflected the essence of her inner journey. The perfect face of the 90s was no longer just about flawlessness. She embraced her imperfections, her vulnerability, and her honesty, which only made her stronger. By speaking out not just about the bright side of fashion, but also its darker truths, she cemented her authenticity. Her Hollywood career continued, but at a gentler pace. Instead of chasing box office hits, Amber sought roles with meaning. After appearing in mainstream films like Hitch, she chose more independent projects with character depth. This proved her career was no longer about fame, but about purpose. Audiences began to remember her not just for her beauty, but for her sincerity on screen. While she grew selective with her acting, her voice behind the scenes grew louder. She delivered speeches at fashion weeks, sustainability panels, and universities. In those talks, she often repeated a humble truth. I'm just like any other woman. The difference is, I'm trying to use my platform responsibly. That humility made her even more beloved. Amber Valletta became a bridge for the future of fashion. On one side, she represented the glamour of the supermodel era. On the other, she paved the way for a new generation seeking ethics and sustainability. Her Master and Muse initiative wasn't just a brand, it was a philosophy. Consume less, value more, make things last. In her personal life, balance remained her guiding principle. Her relationship with her son Auden stayed at the center of her world. Being a role model for him matters far more than being on the cover of Vogue, she said. For Amber, true success was being seen by her child as dependable, strong, and compassionate. Amber's story was also one of healing. Living for years under the constant criticism of the media, enduring the pressure of being judged for her body, was never easy. But over time, she learned to define her worth independently of outside voices. Her activism, motherhood, and career choices all reinforced her inner strength. Today, when people speak of Amber Valletta, they recall not just a supermodel, but a conscious activist, an inspiring mother, and a leader working for society. Her legacy was never confined to the runway. It was built on values, awareness, and change. Amber Valletta transformed from the face of 90s elegance into the voice of 21st century conscience. In fashion history, her place is remembered not just as an icon, but as a teacher, a guide, and a reminder that true beauty lies in purpose.